listening to I Am Refocused Radio with your host, Shamaya Reed. This show is designed to inspire you to live your purpose and regain your focus. And now, here's your host, Shamaya Reed.
Hey, welcome to I Am Refocused Radio. We are here once again. Today, we have another show lined up for y'all. We have a special guest, Dr. Barbara D'Amato, and her amazing novel. It's a fiction novel. It's called Triskele. We're going to learn everything about her process developing the main characters of the book. It's not just one. There's three main characters in this book. So we're going to learn a little bit about her. She is a distinguished psychoanalyst in New York City. She has contributed to many amazing writings professionally for academic, but also with her new book, fiction novel, Triskele. We're going to learn a little bit more about that project. So first and foremost, thank you for your time, Dr. D'Amato. How you doing?
I'm doing very well. It's my pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate your time. So with this book, kind of tell us how, with you being a professional psychoanalyst, how did you make this theme for your book?
Okay, it's an interesting stories here. I guess I've been writing papers for many, many years. I published probably close to 24 papers. And I was preparing for a conference one time, and I was writing up a case study. And as I was writing it, I was noticing that to look at a patient's arc over the course of treatment and how they've changed over time was so interesting to see. And I thought, I really should write a novel. So that's sort of how that came about. Yeah. And the fact that I'm a psychoanalyst and I'm very interested in this process, and I've been listening to stories of all sorts of varieties for decades, it didn't seem like it would be too difficult to put together a story of characters who would converge. And there's a psychoanalyst as one of the characters, and to see where this goes, to give people a taste of what really happens in a psychoanalysis and to see the arc of development over time.
With readers who may not have prior knowledge to knowing what a psychoanalyst does, what are the elements of the book that you hope they will find more enlightening or thought-provoking as they explore the mysteries of the psychoanalytic process?
That's a good question, because I think a lot of people, when they think of psychoanalysis, they think of Woody Allen movies where he's laying on the couch and the analyst is sitting behind him not saying a word, and it's all quite a big, a joke. But psychoanalysis is actually a very active process where the patient comes in, and we do use the couch so the patient doesn't have to have eye contact with the analyst. And so they're much more relaxed. And it's basically just talk therapy. Patients talk about whatever's coming to their mind. And over the course of time, their deepest conflicts do come to the surface and they can be worked on. And I thought with this book, to show that process to people would be an interesting way to see through fictional characters how this kind of process takes place. Psychoanalysis is not really some stuffy, highfalutin thing that happens, or a joke that Woody Allen makes fun of, but it's a really very important modality where people can really, really make deep, significant changes in their life. So I guess I wanted to promote that.
We're talking to our guest, Dr. Barbara D'Amato, and her book that you need to go get is on Amazon. It's Triskele. And let's talk about the characters. Tell us how you were purposely using these characters to add more depth to the narrative.
Okay. A triskele, the title of the book, triskele is an ancient Celtic pre-Christian symbol, and it consists of 3 spirals that are interconnected from a central core. So there are 3 characters in the novel who are all very interconnected and who have a high impact on each other's lives without really knowing it. 2 of the characters are siblings, and they are separated very early in childhood from terrible, disastrous dysfunction in a family. And they were very close until they're separated. 20 years later, they end up randomly in New York City, and both of them randomly develop a relationship with a psychoanalyst. So obviously, ultimately, there's a lot of connection between these 3 people. And I think part of what was important to me to show is that people end up in places in their lives and they make choices in their lives that they're not always sure why they do that. I mean, for these siblings to just randomly meet in New York City sounds kind of far-fetched, but when you listen to real life patient stories, you hear stories like this of how they meet up with someone that they didn't know who really impacted their life in a very powerful way, or someone they did know in childhood. So sometimes they say life is stranger than fiction, and that's probably true.
And you mentioned the word grace in this book and how that is something that is being sought after. Kind of highlight that a little bit for the audience.
Okay. Each of these three characters who meet and impact each other are all carrying some kind of demons, I call them, things that have happened to them. And each of them are searching for grace. I think the idea of grace is really just a kind of sense of personal forgiveness, that to forgive oneself for the things that they have done. And until you can really reach that, you carry this conflict or this suffering with you in life. So all three of them are doing things that are not necessarily in their best interest. And when they get to this point where they can find grace, lives can change. And that happens with patients also. Sometimes people continue to work at a job that they hate, and they really want to do something else. And if they can find the courage to make that switch, then their life becomes much more meaningful. So the idea of grace is really a self-acceptance and a finding of who you really are and what you really want to do with your life. So I think that's what I was trying to portray with each one of these characters.
And with emotional wholeness being a central theme in the narrative, how can people appreciate not having your professional background to appreciate these characters' perspective of finding that wholeness?
Well, I think we see from the history, which you can lay out in a novel, the history of each of the characters, things that happened to them or that caused them to follow the routes that they followed. One of the characters is studying to become a priest. And he's doing this because of his very early estrangement from his family. And he met up with another family that took him in, and one of them was a priest. And he just sort of clung to that. Oh, I'll become a priest. That's what I'll do. And he kind of denied the rest of who he was. He denied his sexuality. He denied everything, that he would just be this priest. And over the course of time, as he started to discover who he really was, maybe the priesthood was not something that he really, really wanted to do. So that's a process that people have to spend time going through to really find out who they really are and what they really want to do.
But this fiction novel is an opportunity to educate people what you just said moments ago. And for someone who, will be able maybe put themselves in the character's shoes, mm-hmm. maybe that can be opportunity for them as well to become whole.
Yes. If someone can relate to the character in their suffering and what's happened to them, and can really relate to their journey, I would hope that people could identify with that, and that might open a different idea for them. The treatment might be something that might be helpful to them.
People can visit your website, diamodel.com, and get your book, Triskele, on Amazon. Let's talk about your experience in New York City, because you being a distinguished psychoanalyst in New York City, how has your personal life also get intertwined into your novel?
That's such a good question. I mean, I guess I believe everyone's life is sort of intertwined with everything that they write. I think Freud had the idea that writers are really in touch with the unconscious, the sort of parts of our mind that we're not aware of. So I think a lot of parts of my own history are probably quite apparent in this novel, certainly to people who know me, because I think everything that we experience, we carry with us, and then it transfers into everything that we do. I mean, I've been practicing for 30 years. I loved working with patients, but I didn't come to it straight away. I didn't wake up one day and say, I want to be a psychoanalyst. I actually started out as a special education teacher. And in the course of my work, I realized a lot of these kids in special ed that I was working with were very smart. was like, why are they in this class? These are like smart kids, but they were not able to learn. And most of them, because my class was smaller than the mainstream, I would have 10 students as opposed to 35. I could really get to know the students. And many of them carried a lot of emotional baggage. They came from broken homes or families who couldn't help them with their homework. So they needed extra help because there were emotional issues at play. So from that, I thought, I really want to become a therapist. I want to work with people's emotional issues to see how we can get through that. So that's when I started to train to become a psychoanalyst. And I guess that was back in 1986. So after that, things just moved forward, and I eventually moved into full-time practice, and I've been doing that for a very, very long time. It can be very, very gratifying work to see people grow and change over long periods of time.
And with the profession that you have as a psychoanalyst, kind of break down a typical session for therapy. What does that look like for a listener's perspective?
Basically, people come to treatment because something's not going right in their life. People don't normally come for any kind of treatment, any kind of therapy to tell you how wonderful their life is. People usually have something that's not working for them. So the way psychoanalysis works is we don't set up goals. We don't say, well, let's work on this. If you want to get a better job, start doing this. We let the person talk just freely about all of their thoughts and feelings about everything in their life. And then over time, the person is able to say, you know what, I think I'm going to change my job because I really want to do this other thing. But it's sort of a process of unpacking. When a person comes in with a problem, I don't really know what the answer is any more than they do until I start to get to know them and start to get to understand what it is they really want. So a regular session is just a person coming in and talking about whatever is on their mind that day. You know, eventually over time, you see certain themes that rise. You get to understand a person's character, what's getting in their way, what's stopping them from achieving the things that they want in their life. So basically, it's just talk therapy. We listen, we ask a lot of questions. Occasionally, we intervene. We do not advise. We do not say, you should do this, you should do that. We ask the person, what do you want to do? What's stopping you from doing that? What's getting in your way? So that's sort of in a very simplistic way, the way that psychoanalysts work.
When it comes to irrational behaviors and their underlying motives,
right?
Going back to the book and those characters, how did you use that to separate each character's life, but it still had a common theme?
Well, I guess in some ways, I think of the three characters as all one character, and each character portrayed a different aspect of a human being. I mean, the brother and sister who were separated, the sister becomes an artist. The brother is trying to become a priest. He's sort of unbelievably good. And the sister is very promiscuous. She acts out. She gets in all sorts of trouble. But because she's so talented, various counselors and colleges and programs that she's in try to save her. So she wasn't really just bad. He wasn't really just good. But these were sort of defenses they were using to hide how badly they felt about other things. And if they could come to grips with that, they could move on and do something else. So the psychoanalyst is sort of a key figure who helps both of them. And in helping them, the psychoanalyst is also helping herself because she's a young woman whose young husband died very quickly, and she's grieving, and she's denying her sexuality now. She wants nothing to do with dating. She's just going to be this stoic person, which of course is not what she really wants. So all of these characters in some way help each other kind of come back to life and find out who they really are.
It's funny. I was just about to say that. and with that said,
Sorry.
no, that's perfect. With that said, how important do you believe people should look at their own life? Because this is almost like a tool for them not to just understand from the perspective of a psychoanalyst, but also facing their own demons, if you will.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think, though, in the course of being raised in a family, sometimes it's hard to do that because families can have stories. Say there's an alcoholic parent. So families have stories that, this really isn't a problem. We don't really talk about this. And as children are growing up, even into adolescence and adulthood, they kind of believe that story. Oh, my mother didn't mean to, to do that when she wrecked the house when she was drunk. So there's a narrative that gets internalized that you grow up with. So it's kind of difficult to unpack that on your own, which is why therapy can be a very valuable asset. People start talking to the therapist. Oh, my mother, she kind of burned the house down once. So she said that, but that's what, and the therapist would say, she did what? I was like, what? Because the patient that just accepts this as normal. So these are the kinds of things that have to happen in the place of a kind of impartial observer in order to make those kind of changes, because they're so deep-rooted in so many people.
And before you wrote your novel, going back to your professional world, you wrote numerous professional papers, and you analyzed the psychic conflicts of literary characters and their authors. Mm-hmm. Kind of explain that to the audience and maybe how that maybe inspired you to use some of those tools in that book.
Okay. One of my favorite papers that I wrote, and one of my favorite books of all times, is the story of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. So in this book, which is a Gothic horror story, the author has Dr. Frankenstein create, as everyone knows, a living being out of dead pieces of bodies that he gathers. It's kind of gruesome and grotesque. But if you look at Mary Shelley's life, Mary Shelley's mother died in childbirth. So there's a connection now between the author and the character that is creating life from death, which I would imagine would be any young girl's fantasy of a mother who had died. Couldn't she come back to life? Mary Shelley used to visit the mother's grave, and she used to spend hours there, sort of longing for this mother who had died. So the whole story of Frankenstein is really about loss, because Dr. Frankenstein, when he creates the creature and the creature comes to life, the doctor is terrified and he runs from this monster. The monster is seeking Dr. Frankenstein because that's his mother, so to speak, because he created him. But the doctor is so frightened by what he's done, creating life out of dead parts, that the monster starts to kill everyone that Dr. Frankenstein loved. So it's really a heart-wrenching, the novel is very different than the Hollywood movie. The Hollywood movie is just ridiculously absurd. But the real story, and that's told in the book, is really a story of loss and a child wanting desperately to seek its mother, and what might happen if it can't do that. The monster then kills. He kills everyone that Dr. Frankenstein loves because he's so angry. You're really my mother, Dr. Frankenstein. So that kind of stuff is incredibly fascinating to me because a lot of this story comes from the author's experience.
And with the book that we are discussing as well, the characters, going back to them, can you discuss the role, the relationships, and the connections in helping the characters navigate their feelings of being lost?
I think that's where the psychoanalyst is pivotal between the brother and the sister. The girl who's an artist, she's mandated to therapy because she's acting out so badly at school. So she gets thrown into treatment with this analyst, and her work starts to happen there. The other brother, who's becoming a priest, and he's running a mission in Times Square, the analyst sort of randomly runs into him when she's getting off of a bus, and they somehow strike up a conversation, and he tells her about his mission, and she's very interested in the work he's doing with these homeless runaway boys. So she starts a supervisory experience with him. Now, the two siblings have different last names. So she doesn't know that she's working with both of these people who are actually related. So all these things start to get unpacked. And over time, there's just a lot of stuff happens that connects the three of them and really helps the three of them.
Once again, talking to our guest today, you can go visit her website. It's very simple, bethemodel.com, and you can go get her book on Amazon. It's Triskele. And you have a lot of people giving you positive reviews on this book. What do you think makes people connect so much to the characters?
I think they're flaws. I think all humans are basically flawed, and so many of us are searching for grace and self-acceptance and to forgive ourselves for what we've done, no matter what it is. I mean, most people think they're worse than they are. So I think if you can relate to those characters, it's a very interesting read. And I think it moves quickly enough that people keep turning the pages. I think that's my particular bias about it.
And you, as the author of this book, were you yourself in pursuit of finding grace, if you will, or purpose, and building what it is you're building your life?
Well, all psychoanalysts have to undergo a personal analysis. So I did a lot of work on myself over many, many years of being in analysis. And most psychoanalysts continue in analysis and supervision throughout the course of their career. So you're constantly working on yourself and you're constantly examining the things that people tell you and the reactions you have to it. So you can work with the patient in a productive way rather than letting your own feelings and biases seep in. So I've done an enormous amount of work understanding who I am and finding grace for myself. It's a wonderful thing. It's not easy. It's hard work, but it's a wonderful thing if you can get there.
Once again, you can go to BeTheModel.com. We've been talking to our special guest, Dr. Barbara D. the Model. And when people pick up this book, Triskele, and they read it and learn a little bit about your professional career, at the end of the day, everyone's different, but what do you hope that they will understand from what you wrote?
That we're all flawed characters. We all need to accept ourselves for who we are. We go through life probably searching for something that we want, that is us, that we may not know what it is. And then people get stuck in kind of dead-end jobs, bad marriages, difficult relationships. And if they can find a way to just speak to someone to unpack what they really want, people are much happier. I mean, it's difficult to be happy on this earth, on this planet, but you can get, you can peel off some of the layers that are weighing you down and go through life in a lighter, more rewarding way. If you can find someone who can listen to you and help you get to understand who you are.
Man, great words. Once again, I want to say thank you to Dr. Barbara for being on the show. Make sure you go get her fiction novel, Triskele. And thank you once again for your time.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.